Yeah, I guess to paint in some of the context, just to say the thing out loud. So when we talk about post-apocalypse, we're talking about stories concerned with the end of civilization, or the end of a civilization, or the end of civilizations. Usually focused on the survivors of the collapse, or in some cases, like After London, the sort of ecology of collapse, right? So like After London is a really weird book in that the first half is literally just like an ecological recounting of like what would happen in London if all the people disappeared, and then the second half is an actual story. That was kind of the way that the genre started, and then it sort of blossomed and evolved. We talked a little bit about the zombie story. We'll probably talk a lot about the disease and the pandemic stories as we get further into the unit. When we talk a little bit about Emily St. John Mandel and her kind of expertise that she brings to the modern version of this genre. And then, of course, with this film, we'll be talking about sort of the nuclear sort of apocalypse that we will become very interested in later on in this unit when we talk a little bit about some stories that concern themselves with that. I think there's probably a few things that I want to get into that I won't sort of talk too much about here that will evolve naturally as we go. We have a bunch of terms that are a glossary. We'll check the terms up at ZeroIndent.com if you want to go grab the meaning of the terms as we use them. I'll try and identify and relitigate the meaning of some of the less common ones, but just to sort of place some of these out there. We're talking a lot about heterotopias, materialism, epistemology, probably a lot about materialism. But in particular with this film, heterotopia is probably the centermost one that we will end up talking about. For those who don't know the term, which I'm assuming everyone except me, heterotopias are basically, it's the idea of if you have a utopia and you have sort of a dystopia, heterotopias are worlds within worlds, right? So they are worlds within worlds that are both similar to their surroundings, but also contrast or upset the continuity of their surroundings. Foucault often describes the heterotopia as a place where few or none of the members of a given space have any like intelligible connection to one another, right? They're worlds within worlds that produce contrast and friction. But the crucial thing for Foucault that makes them heterotopias is that the people contained within them, like they don't have, you can't look at it and be like, yes, this is why everyone is here. So like examples would be like freighter ships, cemeteries, bars, brothels, prisons, like airplanes, things like that. So while there might be some like material reason why people are in the space, the reason why the people are in the space together is not the same, right? When you get on a plane, if you're going for like a work trip for a couple days, and the person sitting next to you is flying back home from a holiday, while you're on the plane for the same reason, the space becomes heterotopic because you're in the same space, but there's no intelligible reason why you're in the same space together. The same with cemeteries, bars, brothels, etc. You get the idea.
Yeah, especially with brothels, I wanted to point that out because like all of my friends, they'll want to go for the women, and I'm going for the free buffet.
Exactly.
Different.
Yeah, he's eating the breakfast buffet. I'm there for the beer. Like we're all there for different reasons. You know what I mean?
Okay, I've never heard of this term. What came to my mind was The Hateful Eight by Tarantino.
Great
Is that
example.
a heterotopia?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of it's a way that you argue for spaces. Like I don't necessarily think anything is or isn't. It's just like things can become heterotopic. It's really common when talking about stories that take place under fascism or some kind of state control, where these places tend to engender friction against the ruling class of the state itself, because in coming together for no intelligible reason, you produce entropy that allows emergent properties to exist, right? Two people that otherwise would never be in the same space happen to be sitting next to each other, happen to start a conversation. It very much the Hateful Eight's a good example. And for us and our purposes, right, talking about post-apocalypse stories, and this film in particular, is kind of by definition, most like science fiction, science fantasy, and almost all post-apocalypse stories are often heterotopic in that because the world ends, right, they are stories that take place in worlds that are radically indifferent to their inhabitants, and they sort of necessarily force people into contact with each other who otherwise wouldn't be, because survivors group together, or a group of survivors clashes with another group of survivors, things like that. And they're deeply antagonistic, which tends to produce heterotopias.
Yeah, it creates like really unique interpersonal relationships that otherwise wouldn't exist because of the setting. Yeah.
Yes. And, not to use another big word straight away, but we talk about that being produced by the decay of like epistemological frameworks, which is an impossible word to pronounce. But epistemology basically is just the theory of knowledge, right? Which is that all knowledge is a product of sense memory. It's a big piece of philosophy that's used to challenge empiricism and rationalism, right? This idea that when you're a teenager, if you're a teenage boy, if you're a straight teenage boy, if you're a straight privileged teenage boy, you tend to develop this sense of like, well, if logic and facts is actually the most important thing, and it takes a long time for that to wear off, we start to realize like, actually, all knowledge is kind of produced by sense memory. It is driven by perspective. Feelings are as important as facts sometimes. The way that heuristic decision making happens has very little to do with facts and is often very much vibes based, which is how most humans function. If we were all fact machines, we'd all lose our fucking minds anytime we had to make a decision. But that decay of the epistemological frameworks is what produces heterotopias, because there's no more electricity because no one knows how to like fix the generator anymore, right? That's like a, knowledge is lost. The sense memory of that knowledge is lost. The internet disappears. You can't look stuff up on Wikipedia anymore. And so just by definition, post-apocalypse stories tend to produce heterotopias. Also think about stuff like stories set in space or on spaceships, right? Star Trek, every season of Star Trek is ostensibly in some way a space that contains multiple heterotopias, right? They go to the Darth, what's the, is it forward? Oh god, the recreation deck in Star Trek Next Generation, 10 forward. Is that right?
The holodeck.
No, the bar.
No.
It's 10 forward, right?
Sure.
Sure, why not? It actually doesn't matter. That's a great example where it's like, in this work environment under this federation, there's a bar that you can go to, but like people are all there for different reasons. We'll talk a little bit about the different subtypes of heterotopias. For us, most relevantly, Foucault's crisis heterotopia is the most important, which is, as Foucault describes it, reserved for individuals who are in relation to society and to the human environment in which they live in a state of crisis. He talks about this as places where coming of age or transformation occurs. The examples he provides are hotels, ships, boarding schools, classrooms, playgrounds, things like that. And of course, crisis heterotopia is the definition of a post-apocalypse story. So again, ZeroIndent.com if you want to sort of grab a list of those terms. And I'll probably start to write a bit more about each of these as we go. And I'll keep adding to that across the length of this unit. So that'll be a great resource if you want to sort of keep up and play along.